gentleman is the director of the film. They are on their way, and so they're not here yet, and I will introduce them when they get here. Okay, so I'm going to take this seat with you, Dave. And because we didn't, oh, is this on? I feel like I'm talking loud enough anyway. Because we didn't have time for the film, I know that there's a lot of questions unanswered that you all don't know. So no question is off limits. We have more time for questions now. So we'll just kind of give an overview, and I have some specific questions that I'm going to ask each of the panelists, and then I'd love to open it up for discussion, questions, anything from you all. I hope that you will have questions, so be thinking of them as we go. And we are sharing this mic, Hannah, is that right?
There should be some that were on the seats. I just want you to speak into those.
Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, my first question. So for our firefighters, Charles and Chris, I know you both already had a deep sense of the problems your firefighters faced in regards to PFAS exposure. And we've talked extensively about how this is just one more issue firefighters have to be concerned about. So can you talk about the steps that you all have already taken as Fire Chief for New Hope Fire and Union President for the town of Carrboro to advocate for your firefighters? And what are the most urgent challenges?
Yeah, sure. So several years ago, we were really lucky in Orange County. We started looking at folks getting cancer, young folks getting cancer, and other health issues. And so we started an initiative with getting folks out of turnout gear as often as possible and going to rescue gear for motor vehicle collisions, wildland fires, those things that generally are not structure related or vehicle fires where you would typically be wearing an air pack. We have learned that our rescue gear is PFAS free, so we're not jumping from the frying pan into the oil. But that's one thing we've done. After we did the viewing at New Hope, we kind of jumped Emily and her crew after the viewing and had a very long conversation about this is just on the scale of things that we worry about. This was not one of those things that really was registering high on our, and it's still not. It's an issue, we know it's an issue. There's folks in the back of this room that I imagine have been doing this 15, 20, 30 plus years that have known there was something off with turnout gear. You're not gonna get firefighters out of turnout gear. There's been initiatives to, maybe the first truck wears turnout gear to calls, whereas structure fires and the second two trucks don't, whatever. That's not what any of us in Orange County decided to do. We're still gonna wear the gear. We do know that there are risks associated with this. It has led to really good conversations with our representatives that sell turnout gear and those things. But for us at New Hope right now, getting our folks out of gear as quickly as possible after calls and getting folks into rescue type gear that we know is PFAS free for those calls that don't require air packs.
So similar to what Charles was saying, yes. So when Emily showed us the video, we kind of shared a similar viewpoint that this is just something else that we have to put on our pan. We're already in a pretty extensive career that makes us more susceptible to cancer off the get-go. And what I went to was, what are we gonna do? Like, we can't just all stop wearing turnout gear. Somebody's gotta go to the emergency. So with that being said, we, in Carrboro, and being the union president, I've been gracefully allowed to enter some conversations with our fire chief and our turnout gear committee. And I was in a 2-hour meeting this morning with Takata Fabrics and talking with them and seeing what they have done to improve. It's not really like on us, in my opinion. We still have to wear the gear at the end of the day. Like, fires still happen unless we build some robot that's going to go in and put the fire out. We still have to. We still have to. Which we're used for that, but we still have to go and put the gear on. So we have looked at some other other things to do as far as not training as much in our gear. We had several guys that wanted to work out in their gear and do PT, so we kind of stopped that and said, hey, consider other avenues, right? And then just doing our own research. You know, we didn't want to, we had the very fortunate, I guess New Hope was involved as well. We had the very fortunate opportunity to work with NC State, I think last year, doing some live burn stuff, and they were actually doing some research on fabrics as well. People don't know, NC State, I think they're one of the one of the biggest textile colleges in the United States. So they came out and they did some pretty extensive testing with us. So we reached out to Dr. Orman, and you know, frankly, he was like, this is a problem, yes, but you also have to worry about if they do fix this problem, what's gonna be the next issue? If we fix this PFAS issue now, what's gonna happen with the next chemical? Is it gonna be 10 times as bad? We don't know that. So just be careful. If I had to express anything to my fellow firefighters from Greensboro and chiefs, it's just don't go out and try to buy a plethora of turnout gear right now until we can figure out where this issue is gonna stand. And then lastly, being in the municipal world, it's always funding, right? There's not a infinite amount of money in local government, so I suggested to Emily, I said, you know, you're talking to the wrong people, like in this room, not in this room, but in the room that we had, it was all firefighters. Like, we know that this is bad, but it's the local political figures like the city manager from Greensboro. Phenomenal that you're here, thank you.
Thank you.
And that's where I expressed to Emily, you need to send it out to them, not us. We know this is a problem for the majority of us, so thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback. It was really helpful. Dave, so you've also been a long-term union president, been very active in this. So how much of this information is news to you?
None of it.
Okay.
I was fortunate enough to see the premiere of Burned earlier in January when it was first showed at our large training event for the union. I got to see it and obviously see Diane Carter and speak. Yeah, I think I would echo the sentiments of my brothers up here. Is that well? I guess I would start to say that at Greensboro, since I've come on, we've already had a really kind of progressive nature towards health and safety. When I came on, we already had 2 sets of turnout gear. We've implemented, I think our department has implemented some really positive steps over the years that kind of push us in better decision-making to help, policy helping to drive culture. And you know, I think of this issue as one, it is a host of issues that we have to deal with as firefighters. There's 2 pieces of it. There's the internal educational component for our members to make better choices, and you know, follow good policies, which we have a lot of in Greensboro, because at the end of the day, as you know, as you said, they could come out with PFAS-free turnout gear tomorrow. It could be magical, but we've got roughly 1,000 pieces of turnout equipment to buy. And that's, you know, our budget man's back there, and I think his toenails are probably curling up, he's been whispering about it, but it's significant, right? I just got a new set of turnout, 2 new sets of turnout gear last month. Those are good for 8 to 10 years roughly, and I mean, that's an investment the city's made that, you know, it's hard to just kick it to the side. So it's, we have a lot of policies. When the Metro Chiefs and the IFF made the joint statement about PFAS, everything that was recommended, we're really already following in Greensboro. There's a reality that we have to have the gear, and somebody's got to go to the emergency. The other piece of it is, so it's the internal, you know, culture, education, policy-based for the fire department, and the external component is education like this, as well as education for our elected officials. And Greensboro's been very active, certainly since I got involved with our union almost 20 years ago, in advocating for broad occupational cancer protections and benefits. And I would say, I'd recognize Mayor Nancy Vaughn back there. City of Greensboro is definitely the only municipality in the state of North Carolina, and I would say likely one of maybe less than 10 in the entire country that have actually, you know, the city of Greensboro put support for occupational cancer protections on their legislative agenda. So prior to us winning broad cancer protections at the state level that went into effect in 2021, our city said, this is an issue that is important to us, and we're going to send our lobbyists to Raleigh to work for broad cancer protections. And that really was I wish I could say that I came up with that idea. I did not. That was an idea that our mayor came to us with and said, I would like to do this. What do you think? And we said, absolutely. And the last thing I'll say on that, and I really should have said the first thing, I'd be remiss that my time as local president, I was elected in 2011. We've lost three members to occupational cancer. Firefighter Butch Cummins in 2012, who died of multiple myeloma, a cancer that firefighters are 50% more likely to contract. Engineer Ramsey Elamine, who was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in October of 20, and we buried him in January of 21. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is, firefighters are also around 52% more likely to contract that. And then most recently, our good friend, Engineer Robert Swink, sorry, whose son is on our job, and who's a good, Swink's a good friend of mine, who had fought prostate cancer multiple times. It metastasized, and obviously prostate cancer is very common, but again, firefighters are 30% more likely to contract that, and especially contract to those levels that take our lives. So it's very real to us. We've been working on it for a long time. We've had a lot of good partners with our local government and support and leadership from our fire department. And we've had some good wins at the General Assembly to help us get the health care we need, so we don't have to do hot dog,
Pancake breakfast.
pancake breakfasts, sell do raffles for AR-15s or whatever, like raise money for healthcare. So yeah, that's how we've been. That's how it's impacted us in Greensboro and how we've been involved in Greensboro.
Wow. Go ahead.
So I think the permissible, can y'all hear me? Okay. I think the permissible limit for PFAS is, was it 0.002 parts per trillion? Do we have any hazmat folks in here? Okay.
I don't want to raise their hand.
Yeah, okay, so that's a really minuscule amount, right? Like, that's not a lot at all. So they found the turnout gear has 1 to 4% in it, so that's a lot. Was it pounds or percentage? I can't remember, but yeah, it's way more than it should be, so that's something you missed in the movie. I just wanted to throw that out there real quick, just so we can kind of get an idea of the amount of exposure that our folks are taking on every single time they go to work. And every single person that I talked to in my organization about this was like, yeah, we still gotta go to fires, we're still gonna wear turnout gear. Nobody in this room, if it's new to them, is gonna quit their job tomorrow. Even though that the stuff that is supposed to protect them is causing us to have adverse health reactions. So just want to throw that out there to folks that might not be familiar with what a firefighter's mindset is like.
Go ahead.
One of the biggest things that me as the union president in Carrboro fought for was funding for physicals, and more specifically NFPA physicals with ultrasounds. There's some conflicting studies out there about ultrasounds and cancer and stuff like that, but at bare minimum, if there's an abnormality on that ultrasound, it can get you to the doctor early, as opposed to not having it and going on and on and on, and then all of a sudden you start having more health effects that lead to, now you're in stage 4 when you could have caught it at stage 1. So once again, with that comes money, budgets, city councils, and elected officials. So that played into me explaining to Emily, as a fire department, we know this is a problem, but it's the elected officials and the town councils and the state legislators that need to see this, because we obviously need the money for the physicals and turnout gear and all the other costs and incentives that we have to use. So.
I'm gonna welcome up Elijah Yetter-Bowman. So Eli is the director of this film. Thanks for coming. Read your little, sorry, I wasn't prepared to read your bio here. Okay. Award-winning filmmaker Elijah Yetter-Bowman grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina as a curious problem solver. They attended UNC Chapel Hill originally to pursue a path in healthcare. Recognizing a lack of creative communication for complex issues, they founded Ethereal Films to help solve dire problems through storytelling and impact campaigns. They received numerous awards, including the Southern Exposure Film Fellowship in 2021 and dubbed a Kentucky Colonel by Governor Beshear in 2022 for their efforts on PFAS awareness. Their work bridges gaps between many disciplines, including polymer chemistry, advising the NC Attorney General, and expert consulting. Thanks for joining us. Have you been briefed? Do you know what happened? There was a storm.
No.
Everyone will be mailed or emailed the link to the film, but we were able to see about 6 minutes of it before the film cut out. So, I've given a synopsis. We've started our panel. Welcome. So one piece that you all didn't see in the film, Charles kind of mentioned it a little bit, but the level that the EPA has set as acceptable for one of these PFAS is 0.004 parts per trillion, and that's in drinking water. One of the numbers so Diane Cotter was a firefighter wife that sent off samples, and do you want to talk a little bit about the numbers that she saw in those samples?
Well, yeah, I think the panel, I'm pretty loud. So.
Yeah, okay.
As one of our panelists just brought up, the samples that were sent to Dr. Grant Peasley at Notre Dame, who is a nuclear physicist, were as high as 2%, right? Which is such an astonishingly large concentration when you think of sub-part per trillion is what the EPA currently would say is a dangerous amount of exposure. You know, we're talking about literally hundreds of trillions of times larger amounts. It's mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing. Another piece of information in this film that I want to make sure all of you are aware of is that the IAFF is the one who sets standards for the turnout gear. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the NFPA.
NFPA, thank you.
And so the IAFF is the International Association of Firefighters, which is the union that represents all areas of the United States and Canada. And it's so exciting to see their president is featured prominently throughout the film, General President Ed Kelly, and they are taking this issue so seriously that the NFPA, there's an alphabet soup, the NFPA, that body that sets these standards, which has required the use of PFAS in gear, the union is suing them currently. That is how bold of a stance they're taking on this issue, and personally I think that's the right call.
Okay, so our next question is for Eli. You have a background in chemistry and lab work, and then have had a very personal experience that tied you into PFAS advocacy work. But your experience here has really been focused on drinking water exposure. So how did that trajectory lead you to work with firefighters, and why did you find it important to tell this particular story?
Yeah, well, I've been deep diving this issue for about 6 years at this point. Like probably other people in this audience, I grew up in North Carolina. Specifically, I grew up in Wilmington. If you don't know, Wilmington has some of the most polluted water in the country. We've been drinking a myriad of different PFAS chemicals for about 40 years through the municipal water. And that was only news for us in 2017. And so I have been focused on that, understanding how that could happen, but also that was actually part of really a global crisis that's been happening. So many communities, such as Pittsburgh, or all over the country and all over the world, wake up one day to a news article of, oh my God, my community is poisoned. And as I quickly learned throughout following this rabbit hole, we have this in common, right? This is not an accident. These are not individual problems. These are linked to really a few bad corporations who have been systematically polluting most of the world, ultimately for the sake of profit. And in following that rabbit hole of research, we worked with Diane and Paul Cotter, and this was while they were first meeting that nuclear physicist, Grant Peasley. So they were really they were pushing something, as the film describes, which is this notion that also, simultaneous to people's water being polluted for decades, Firefighter turnout gear since the 70s has contained huge quantities of these chemicals. She had this hunch, but it was a very, very long uphill battle to prove that, right? I mean, she had a huge burden of proof. She wasn't a scientist. She didn't have the sort of accolades that most folks would just trust on face value. Really, for lack of a better word, she was considered like a crazy person on social media for a very long time. But we felt like there was something really truthful to her story, and we were like, let's continue to follow, let's continue to work with you. As we were moving more seriously into the production of our work, and we had to, we started to bring in big names, big celebrities, and work with some of the other folks. We met, thanks to her, the president of the IAFF, who was taking this very seriously. He did not think she was a crazy person on social media. She was unique and quirky, but she was right. And simultaneously, the work of Dr. Graham Peasley was published, peer-reviewed. It was irrefutable. She had been right all along. And so there was sort of a moment a year ago when we were filming with our producer, Mark Ruffalo, and talking to him about this issue. And we mentioned the fact that firefighter gear is poisonous. And he was like, one of my closest friends has been a firefighter his entire life. He's recently retired captain. Can I do something for this? And so he created this little, basically poured his heart out to the camera as a PSA to help elevate this story. That firefighter turnout gear, yes, it's poisonous, and that's ridiculous. It makes no sense. And saying it right now, that's ridiculous. It's protective gear. It's made to keep you safe. It's already a hard enough job. And so we had a moral conflict where we said, we have this story of how a person who was touched by occupational cancer that affects firefighters figured out this huge contributing factor and no one would listen to her. And we thought, well, we could wait and include that in our feature film all about PFAS, but then it might be buried, it might be kind of muddled. Or we could put that on pause and make a standalone film, and that's what happened. We decided, let's make Burned, and let's get it out. And so grateful for the union, really, President Kelly, for saying, this is fantastic, let's premiere it in January of this year at this massive leadership conference that we host. We had like 2,000 different firefighters from all over the country in attendance, and it was life-changing. This film is now premiered at 1,200 different fire departments across the world, and we're seeing like completely radical change. So it was almost a last-minute decision. We said, hey, I think this is so serious, can we just fix this? Because how many people wake up every day, put on the clothes they need to do their job, and then know that it's actively harming them? I mean, that's absurd. I still think it's absurd, and I think it needs to change, so that's why.
Stephanie, you've been keeping close tabs on the legislature this session, which is hard, bless you. There are several bills, good and bad, that attempt to tackle PFAS issues, but there's one in particular that has a direct impact on firefighters. So can you talk a little bit about Senator Lee's provision in the budget and the Stanley County Training Facility?
Yes, so as Emily mentioned, there's been a whole slew of bills attempting to address PFAS in drinking water this year, firefighting foam, turnout gear. The piece that we think is most likely to pass is actually a series of provisions that's in the draft state budget right now. The provisions are a real mixed bag. There's some things that we really like about them, and then some things that really need improvement. So I'll start with what we like. There is some funding for health studies for firefighters. We think that's good. We think that the health should be studied of firefighters. That's due, the funding is specifically for looking at previous exposure to PFAS on the job and how that may impact firefighter health. I think that's a really good thing. We need more information, and hopefully that will lead to better protection in the future, better funding for healthcare as well for firefighters. So we strongly support that. There's also funding to create a state buyback program for firefighting foam. We think this is also a great thing. Firefighting stations should not be burdened with storing PFAS foams. The funding would go to both municipal stations as well as volunteer stations. We think that's really strong as well. Where we are working to improve that one is just to set some more guardrails and specifications around what actually happens to that foam. Right now, the language is very loose. We believe that that foam should really be safely stored until a destruction method is fully vetted, fully proven safe, because the last thing we wanna do is contaminate another community through an irresponsible destruction method. So we really want some tighter guardrails on that one. But where we've been spending most of our time is actually around the funding that would create a new firefighter training facility in Stanley County. We think the idea of a training facility for firefighters is wonderful, but unfortunately right now the language specifies that PFAS firefighting foams would be allowed at the site for the use of training and drills. You know, we ask firefighters to do a lot for us, to put your lives on the line. We really don't think that there is any reason to expose firefighters to dangerous chemicals for training purposes. It's really out of step with what other states are doing. Other states are banning PFAS foams for training. Other states are even phasing out PFAS foam for emergency uses. The military is required to phase out PFAS foam for emergencies. And they actually have a ban for using PFAS foam for training purposes. So we really just think this is a bad move for North Carolina, a bad decision for firefighter health. So what we are really working toward is trying to improve those provisions. We're asking that they make the Stanley County Firefighting Training Facility PFAS free. There are training foams widely available. There's PFAS free, they're called synthetic fluorine free foams widely available. There's even a manufacturer in North Carolina that makes PFAS free foam. So we're really working to try to get that improved this session. We've seen some minor improvements to the language thus far and just still hopeful that we'll get there before the end of the session.
So Stephanie touched on it a bit, but there are a lot of things that are happening that are showing some progress. And Charles and Chris, just before the film, you mentioned that there was this new gear that only has PFAS on the moisture barrier. Can you talk a little bit about those advancements and what your hopes are?
Yeah, so I'm good. As I mentioned earlier, literally this morning, starting at 9 o'clock, I had a meeting myself, my fire chief, my battalion chief in charge of purchasing turnout gear for us. We all had a meeting with Tincata. Tincata is a fabric manufacturer for protective fabrics, and I would say there's only 3 that the fire service uses. They're probably the top. And so essentially in early 2021, Tincata switched away from putting PFAS in their thermal layer and their outer shell. And the rep was completely honest, there is some still in the moisture barrier, but that's the purpose of the PFAS chemicals, is to repel water. So it has shrank, the total amount of PFAS in the turnout gear itself has shrank a lot, and their theory was, try to keep the chemicals, try to put as less chemical as possible on the actual skin. So when they took it out of the thermal layer, that was a big thing, and so yeah.
Yeah, like Chris just said, we were able to meet with the same folks, and from what they're saying, and we can hopefully all do a little bit of additional research with this, any PFAS that's in turnout gear after 2021, manufactured after, I guess, January 2021, is encapsulated in the moisture barrier, so it doesn't touch your skin. But that doesn't fix the fact that, I've only got 50 folks in my organization. I'm not sure how many folks wear turnout gear in Greensboro. But that means I have turnout gear from 2012 to 2021, 2022 that I've got to figure out to do something with. And right now, our set of gear that we purchased, one set is, after you get boots, helmets, gloves, everything else is around $4,000. So we try to buy 5 sets a year to try to stay on top all of our folks having 2 sets in case one's damaged, one's dirty at a fire. And that comes from a different initiative to initially combat cancer on the side of contaminated turnout gear, from burned, from being dirty to soiled at fires. So yeah, I guess talking to these reps, at face value is good, and I hope they're being honest with us.
Eli, do you wanna add anything about things that are changing on a federal level or even global level?
Well, I'll say I met with a rep at Steadfast at FDIC this year, and for folks that don't know, FDIC is a very large conference for firefighters and instructors internationally. It's held in Indiana. And like 3 days before FDIC, these folks at Steadfast have been working on this for 7 years. They were like, we passed all the tests, we meet the current NFPA spec, there's no fluorine in any of the 3 layers. And so they like went out to Kinko's and like bought giant printables to hang up that same weekend. And so I actually just reached out to them again because that's like, okay, we had it, it meets all the standards right now without changing anything. And so my question, of course, is how do we mass produce and how do we get that to every firefighter in the country? So that's kind of what's changing. I mean, this is like really, it's happening so quickly. We were just hosting another event in Massachusetts recently, in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is where Paul and Diane are from. It was a very important event. It was great. We had hundreds of folks there in attendance, including the professional firefighters in Massachusetts. It was wonderful. We even had a state representative, Representative Jim McGovern, who came on stage and said, holy crap, I get sent so much stuff every day, documents and data and graphs and stuff that just makes you want to fall asleep. But after watching this film, I want to bring it to my colleagues in DC and force them to watch it so we can get federal legislation. So that was like a few weeks ago. We were just being contacted with folks in charge of the fire departments in Hong Kong and in Poland. The folks in Poland are interested in taking this to the European Union and using this as a way to get a European Union-wide ban on PFAS as a class of chemicals. So things are happening like so ridiculously fast. It's really awesome. It's a little bit hard to keep track of. But I'm hopeful. I want to talk to the folks at Steadfast because if they're the only ones who are making truly fluorine-free gear, and I say this as a chemist, it should have always been that way. There are many safe ways to waterproof things that don't involve fluorine. I want to help get that to everyone, right? Yeah, and I also don't think the firefighters should be responsible for paying for their replacement.
So paying for replacement is very expensive, and I know that there was a part of the legislation before that talked about buyback for firefighting foams, and that's not here, but it's a step in the right direction. Stephanie, can you talk a little bit about that buyback program?
Yeah, so right now the funding for that program is connected to the firefighter health studies as well as a training facility. So there is $20 billion set aside for those 3 core pieces. So what the buyback program would do is it would actually, it would give funding from the state budget to purchase back that foam. So the state would purchase the foam directly and would then be responsible for it. And what I've learned in conversations with folks from industry is that to replace AFFF with PFAS-free foams, it's actually pretty comparable. The price, depending on what type you're getting, is about the same as what AFFF was. So I think it's a great deal. The program will probably need additional funding in the future. I don't think that $20 million for all of those pieces is going to be able to purchase all of the PFAS foam that is throughout the state, but I think it's a really good step in the right direction. So yeah, we support it and hope that that piece passes.
So just to give y'all an idea, I've got, I think 15 5-gallon buckets of AFFF foam sitting in the back of my Station 1 right now because I'm not willing to pay $13,000 for somebody to come get that.
We've got 10.
Yeah,
across.
and once again, I'm a 50-member organization with 3 engines, 2 tankers, and a couple other random things that we take to call sometimes. You look at the Greensboro, Raleigh, and Durham. I mean, it's astronomical. So yeah, $20 million might get close, but probably gonna need a few more bucks to take care of that.
And I will say that when that was first put out as a legislative item, the language didn't initially include volunteer firefighter programs. And so one thing that we've heard is that these volunteer firefighter programs usually get the hand-me-downs. Like they get the old turnout gear, they get the old phones. And so we worked really hard to make sure that the volunteer programs were included in that as well. Stephanie, one question for you. In this room, we have elected officials, we have firefighters, we have community members. So what are some actions that people can take this week, this month, to push the legislature to take swift action on PFAS?
So I think y'all know this and you've heard it before, but calling your legislators, visiting your legislators, and beyond that, really telling them your personal stories, I think could be really impactful. PFAS is a bipartisan issue, so I think anytime legislators are hearing personal stories, personal impact from firefighters can be incredibly helpful to get this issue moving in the right direction. We're hearing now that the budget is likely to pass in mid-August, so we've got some time here, but I think the sooner the better, especially with the Senate. The Senate's really conferencing on this and discussing the budget right now, so if you can reach out to your state senators, that would be wonderful. And again, it's both sides of the aisle are important on this, and personal stories really matter.
And I can't stress that enough. I feel like if you all have come to any of our events, I'm a broken record telling people to call their legislators. We do lobbying work, and Hannah and I actually took some community members from Greensboro to talk to their representatives. And one of your representatives, Pricey Harrison, has been a leader in PFAS advocacy from the get-go. She is one of the few that no matter what, she puts out very protective policy to protect us from PFAS. Another wasn't necessarily John Faircloth. This was news to him, and we brought in a community member to tell her story, and you could see that it really changed his mind. He got emotional about how much this is impacting his communities, his family, and so it makes such a difference for them to hear from people like you rather than advocates from Haw River Assembly and Conservation Network. So we can always help facilitate that, but would love for you guys to really reach out to your legislators because it makes such a difference.
If I can jump in again too, I've been going over there about once a week. I would love nothing more than to put some of y'all in front of legislators. So please do catch me after if this issue speaks to you. I would love to help. I can give you talking points. I can show the language improvements we're looking for, and would just be delighted to help you.
Okay, question for firefighters. This job is one of the most dangerous jobs there is, and it's one of the most essential for protecting our communities. But on top of physical hazards of just being in burning buildings and being the first responder in any kind of crisis, the International Agency for Research on Cancer has now designated the firefighting profession to an IARC Group 1 designation, meaning that it's carcinogenic to humans. But I know firefighters, and for some of you, this is a job that you've wanted since you were a kid. My brother's been a volunteer firefighter for 20 years now. We have covered so many heavy topics, but there are some real joys to this job. And what is it that drives you all to do this work? Dave, I'd love to start with you. If you're ready.
All right, great, yeah. I think doing hard work with good people. I think about the idiots that I work with. I say that lovingly. Every day that I get to work with every day, and there's great joy and I think value in the work that we do. It feels good to be one of the maybe few government agencies that it's better when you left than when you got there, that you actually can see real-time tangible results. They don't always turn out to be what we want them to be or what we hope them to be, but oftentimes it's better than we got there. And being able to do that with good people, people you care about, is, I think, the most rewarding part for me.
So we do, we do something different every single day. It's never the same thing. Even from the smallest organizations to some of the bigger ones, it's always fast paced. You know, there's always something to be done. And like Dave just said, you get to work with really good people. You have common goals, and the goal is to always make things better. That's generally what we do. Chris was the best man in my wedding, you know, so you meet lifelong friends and build relationships that, I don't hear anybody else, talking about their jobs. So we're very fortunate to be able to do what we do.
For me, it's community. In very few professions do you get to wake up and serve your neighbor. You know, personally, I live in the fire district that I protect. I think that's, I wasn't in the military, but if I'd equated it with being, you know, going to serve your country in the military. And so for me, it's as simple as serving my community. I just so happen to get paid for it, so, but that's why I love doing it.
Thanks for that. Well, I want to leave us on kind of a happy note there. I'm going to open it up to questions after one more kind of big picture conversation starter. So keep this concise. There's a lot of things that we could change. But if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing, what is the one thing you would do if you could change how our society is dealing with this environmental and human health crisis? I don't want to put anybody on the spot to start first, so.
I don't have to go first this time.
I read this question in advance and thought about it. If someone wants to make any kind of product at all, they want to sell us something, they have to be responsible for that product for its entire lifetime. That is the one magical thing, because the defining characteristic of PFAS, forever chemicals, that they last pretty much forever. And I think knowing that with the weight of the science that we know, it'd be ridiculous to propose to try to make money off something like that, right? You can never really clean it up unless you want to spend way more than you ever would have made. So how do we deal with that and potentially similar issues in the future? If you're gonna make something, you're responsible for its entire lifetime. That would fix this problem, financially responsible.
I think about this question a lot because I've spent a lot of time working on toxics issues. And for me, chemicals should be proven safe before they're allowed on our store shelves, before they're allowed in our environment, and ultimately in our bodies. This story just repeats itself over and over, and I think if we handled our chemicals a little better, with greater transparency, I think we'd be in a much different place.
Cautionary principle. Who's next? You got magic wands. I got 3 wands left.
I would say, I guess, for lack of better terms, honesty. Don't try to hide stuff with these chemicals. You know, no matter if it's the chair or a turnout gear, you know, for these companies, be upfront and honest, right? I think, you talked about the whole Purdue Forum and OxyContin thing. If they were just honest from the get-go, none of that would happen, potentially. So just, that would be my magic points, honest. Rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah, hang on, is it 1, 2, 3?
1, 2, 3, go.
1, 2, 3,
Throw.
throw. Okay, all right, ready? 1, 2, 3. So does that mean you go or I go?
That's how we settle things
And
here.
I'll say,
Big decisions.
we used to, my last firehouse, we had to wash dishes. One of the games we played was, we'd do rock, paper, scissors tournaments that might last an hour. But we had to type up about 2 pages of rules to keep everybody honest. You know, I think, and you said something, Eli, initially, that stuck with me, or that kind of rattled around my head a little bit in terms of profit motives. And I think that, you know, there's deep and profound parts of our economic system that reward bad behavior. you know, sometimes it's happenstance, we find ourselves in situations, or whether it's chemicals or, you know, the opioid crisis or whatever, where it's like a series of events, but sometimes, y'all, there's just billings. And I think there's a large piece of our economic system that creates and rewards billings. So I think there's you want me to wave a wand, I'm not telling you what economic system that would be, but I'm just saying, like, this one is given as much as there's good things about, you know, certainly we're, you know, our country, but there's a lot of things that I think putting profit before people is the issue. So whatever that would be, you know, there you go. I would change that.
I should have gone before you. So I currently have 2 members, that are fighting cancer, whether it's related to this or something else, don't know. But getting them care has been so difficult. Fortunately, they have great jobs with great benefits. They're both volunteers, they do this for free. Depending where you get your data from, 50 to 75% of the country is still protected by people, that do this for free. And they're still wearing this gear. I guess my magic wand would be, just take care of us. Madam Mayor, I'm so glad you're here. I hope you reach out to the folks around you, that do the same job you do. But just take care of us. None of us are really asking for anything, you know, we're still gonna show up every single day to do the job. But when that time comes, because it's going to, whether it's a blown out knee, bad back, bad shoulders, or you do get cancer, you do get burned, just take care of us. That's really, really difficult. That, I started when I was 17 years old, so for almost half my life, I've been doing this, and if something happens to me, I'm going to incur thousands of dollars worth of medical bills. But I'm willing to do it because it's the best job in the world, so.
Oh, yeah, I'd like to. All right, so I'd love to just open the floor to questions or conversation. Don't be intimidated.
I don't have a question, but I do have a statement that, when we think of this, we think of the firefighter aspect, the people who own the job. But when you deal with someone with cancer, somebody who has cancer, it's not a firefighter issue, it's a family issue. Because now you're looking at the, the effects that the spouse, the children, the parents, the brothers, everybody has to deal with because of this aspect. So even if you look past just the firefighter, because firefighters are small, community, and when it comes to the workforce, but think of tripling, quadrupling that about the people it affects outside that one individual. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you kind of mentioned this before of like advanced screening and having all of those things to catch these things early, and your comment just made me think, like, my brother will not go to the doctor if his hand is severed, you know, and so I think that if there was a screening that was through the programs and, you know, wasn't just waiting on these firefighters and volunteer firefighters to go to the doctor on their own accord, it could be really life-changing.
I would say to that, and I'll brag on our administration a little bit. We partnered with them to bring United Diagnostic Services to Greensboro at a significantly reduced rate, and provided cancer screenings for our members. And you know, our fire chief's one. You know, we went to him and said, "Hey, can we do this at the training center?" And he's absolutely, where take my money? When do I get to do it? So we got a great partnership with our administration, and you know, that's one of the things that we had done here was for those who wanted it, providing those scans.
Wow. Any other questions, comments, statements?
I'm sorry, yeah.
No, go ahead.
So, I can't see the gentleman back there, but, so I agree with you. When Emily and the group came to Chapel Hill, one of the captains from Chapel Hill Fire Department, he kind of reiterated what you said. He was like, you know, firefighters, we're gonna take what we get and go on about our day. You know, that's just our everyday life. We're used to that. We're used to not, sorry, Mayor, but we're used to not getting raises, and we're used to not getting stuff like that, so we're used to coping with what we have. But if you can reach out to, you know, and scream this from the mountaintops to say, hey, this is not only affecting the firefighters, but it's affecting the wives, the children, the grandparents, and everybody in the family, not just us. So yes, I agree with you.
So I got some notes here I'm gonna throw out, so I'm gonna lose track. My name is Ben Messina, I'm the secretary of local 147, here in Greensboro, I'm captain of 10 as well. We try to stay on track. They brought up UDS, and that was something I was gonna mention, but I want to thank Haw River Assembly for putting this together. I think it's important. I want to thank everybody for coming out to learn a little bit more about this, and especially Elijah. I was able to see the premiere in Ottawa earlier this year. As I saw the premiere, I was witnessing my brother suffer from glioblastoma. My brother was fireman in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and I'm trying to keep it together right now. But we've talked about the guys that we buried, and there's a lot of guys in different departments now that have cancer that we're not buried, or we're not buried yet. And I want people to keep that in mind as well. So, a decade in Greensboro, we buried 3. I buried my brother in May. And it's been terribly, just heartbreaking, to witness this over and over and over again. Things like, luckily we have a city that supports us. We have an administration that is happy to collaborate with us on health and safety issues in Greensboro. A lot of departments either don't have the ability to do that or choose not to for, a number of reasons. I guess I just, again, want to thank everybody for this, and that with this there's gotta be a culture change, and it's tough, especially, I used to be a young fireman. I'm not a young fireman anymore, but I see young firemen coming to work. And, they wanna look sexy, they wanna look cool, they wanna look all the stuff wearing the bunker gear all the time. They wanna have this image, and we gotta shake that, because we're burying people, so they can look cool as they walk around, more or less. We get off track here a little bit, but, I'm proud of what our locals done, I'm proud of what our city's done for us, and again, I just wanna keep pushing forward and thank Elijah and the film, which unfortunately didn't work out for us tonight, but I beg everybody to watch this and pass it on. And we're planning to show it at our quarterly meeting at the end of the year. And we'll invite you guys to that meeting. That way, we can continue spreading this word and helping everybody. So, thank you guys.
Thank you. And thanks for sharing that. And I know, Dave, you also shared some personal experiences there. And it just makes me think that, Stephanie and I talk to legislators every week about this. And we work with scientists, we work with researchers. And the thing that I get so frustrated about is when decision makers or researchers fail to connect the dots. These are not just data points. These are real people with real families. And that's why it means a lot more when y'all tell your stories versus me and Stephanie, because we can share all of these stories, but until they hear it directly from you, it just doesn't hit the same. So thanks for sharing that.
I'll share something real quick. Mine are more statements, I guess. My name is Jim Robinson. I'm the fire chief here in Greensboro. And Emma, I want to say thank you for bringing this into town. I have seen bits and pieces of the film. I had some discussion at the Metro Chiefs conference recently in Columbus, Ohio. I grew up in the special operations in the fire department. I dealt with the phone stuff. And I will say to Stephanie, 20 million is not even close. We are so far away from that. The city of Greensboro alone would take $1 million of that. We protect one of the largest above-ground fuel storage facilities east of the Mississippi. You have 2 pipelines that run through Greensboro that feed from the Houston Ship Channel all the way to New York Harbor. Those 2 pipelines control every DC airport, every New York City airport, every New Jersey airport, Norfolk Naval Base, the critical infrastructure that we have here, we have to have foam. It would shut down the entire East Coast. And we have taken it on to look at and I'm not a chemist, but I deal with C8 when you talk about, I'm glad the director's here and I can talk chemistry a little bit. When we talk about long chain forever chemicals, we were pushed into C6. And guess what? That's next on the hit list. And I know that's coming 5-10 years down the road. C6 is not any better than C8 in our opinion. And we're looking for the magical fluorine-free foam that works. We just sent 2 or 3 guys to Texas to watch some tests of some fluorine-free foam at Texas A&M, and I think there's some promising stuff on the horizon. That's coming. I feel like I can speak a little freely when you talk about our gear, our NFPA. The people that sit on those committees are the manufacturers, which is an issue for us. That's why it's, we're destroying a fire helmet at 10 years, a pair of boots that's 10 years. My gear that I have certainly would make it more than 10 years. These guys maybe not that are fighting fire, but my gear riding around in a bag is probably gonna make it a little longer. So that they have an interest, just like the Sackler family had an interest, to produce an opioid, Oxycontin, that they have an interest in the product that we are wearing. And, so I think the C6, C8 discussion has to continue. The National Firefighter Registry at the federal level is important for us to talk about and bring up. They have a goal, I believe, of 200,000 firefighters by the end of the year, and we are way short. And it's quite frankly, it's because they put the legislation in, I think, in 2018, but there hasn't been a push to get our folks registered, and we have to take that push to get them registered. I appreciate the partnership with the local here in Greensboro. We do things together all the time. One of our members started doing mass decon, building a little device. The news has covered it, where we mass decon ourselves on the truck. We've purchased decon buckets. I think we were early on in doing some of those things. We have not gone to the clean cab concept yet. There's discussions about it, but if we wash stuff and keep it clean, there's some other schools of thought there. But I do want to say the partnership we formed with our local, digging into additional cancer screenings are great. They are fantastic. As Vinny said, we buried 3 of our own. Vinny buried his brother just recently. There's so many stories out there that you don't hear, that you don't know about. We've got an air unit that they refill our bottles that we wear on our back. So they're always touching the dirtiest thing we have. And we started that unit doing hood exchanges, taking our hoods off, giving fresh hoods out. At one time, all 3 of those individuals that rode that truck had cancer. And I can count the 4th one that was on it. Dave mentioned Robert Swing passed away of prostate cancer. The other 2 individuals were male. Both of them had prostate cancer. And the 4th one was a female, had ovarian cancer. And you cannot tell me there's not a connection to riding that one rig, filling those air bottles. They go on every single fire we have in the city of Greensboro. A couple hundred times a year, plus training events. They're always handling it. We have absolutely struggled to find a FDA-approved cancer screening. So Ron is our safety officer. I sent him something last week. Is it the gallery, Dennis? So we were looking at the gallery. test. It's about $1,000 per member, and it's not FDA approved yet. So we need some higher up push, at the federal level, to get, now those are the same people that approved OxyContin. I get it. But, we need some help with that science also. Not only the science to replace our foam and our turnout gear, we gotta have some science for us, because we're talking about things that are harming us. You've got a whole generation of firefighters. I've been with the city for a little over 28 years, 29, 30, 34. You know, these are individuals that, we don't know what's coming next, you know, in our life when we retire. And, you know, we've got a little over 330 retirees in our organization. So not only do we have just over 600 active members in the Greensboro Fire Department, we've got a whole 300 or 400 retired members that we have to think about and take care of also. Because we track on them, we hear stories, you know, we keep up with them. It's sad when we bury a retiree, and our oldest right now is 96 or so, which is great, but there's like not many people in between, you know, 75 and the 90 range. It's a very small percentage of our retirees, so it is affecting them. The firefighter registry at the federal level, we want those retirees registered also, and we want to push that to our retired folks when you have a chance to do that. But I just want to say thank you for bringing it in. I know I went over my time allotment. I appreciate our honorable mayor being here. She supports us all the time on issues that we fight for, and especially around our health and safety. It's very important to our city. It's important to us. I would say we are one of the few fire departments in the nation that do a NFPA 1582 physical. There are a lot of departments coming online now doing that, but we've been doing that for how many years? Dave, you know? 20 years? Almost 20 years? Does that still come up short? Absolutely. You know, we need to add mental health to that screening. We need to add cancer to that screening when we talk about our physicals. You know, we're no different than anyone else when you talk about mental health. When you look at the cancer, of course, we're much higher, but our mental health is much higher also. We've had multiple firefighter suicides in the organization. You don't hear about it. We don't talk about it a lot, but it all adds up. It's the pressures of the job, and cancer is just something that's stacked right on top and at the forefront, especially when was it Elijah said, you know, what's supposed to be protecting us is actually killing us. So, thank you.
Do either of you guys want to respond to that? No? Okay.
I told y'all he was good.
Yeah, well, and selfishly, I always appreciate these screenings because I learn so much. I mean, I've learned so much from Charles and Chris at the Orange County screenings, and it's just really eye-opening to see all of the different kind of cross-sectionality of this issue. I'm in water quality, like that is my niche, and then that has kind of blended into this work, but then also everything you said about healthcare, like where is that piece of the policy puzzle here? So yeah, this is good.
So one thing I asked, when they came to our department to do this, was we're talking about cancer, what else, right? So I'm 32 years old. I quit smoking 4 years ago, so I thought I was doing pretty good. Back in the spring, I got diagnosed with high cholesterol. My assistant chief is a pretty healthy guy. He just got diagnosed with high blood pressure. We buried a guy in Hillsborough, 32 years old, dropped dead of a heart attack. So what else is it doing? What don't we know? We're talking about cancer, but, I feel like there's probably more to it than just the cancer stuff, so I hope we can look into that stuff as well.
Both of those health effects that you listed have been associated with PFAS.
Anita?
I just wanted to say, I'm Anita, I work with Haw River Assembly. A connection that we were talking about before was how firefighting foam can get into the water supply. And I don't know if that's been covered in the film or not, but that might be something that you can enlighten the group about, is, you know, like happening where it gets, you know, in a runoff and then gets into the river.
Sure. So, in Greensboro specifically, there was an issue, this was maybe 4 years ago, where the city of Greensboro's water supply, Lake Townsend, was contaminated with really high levels of PFAS. And they didn't really know why. It's a, you know, protected reservoir, and what they traced it back to was firefighting foam that was used at the Piedmont Triad Airport. And so that firefighting foam contaminated that drinking water supply. Another thing that has just recently been brought to my attention, at least, Stephanie, you may know about this more than I do, is with this proposal for the Stanley County training facility, there is a lot of concern about even that, the firefighting foams that are being used on site, that never goes away. And so that will contaminate the soil, the groundwater. So those are bigger concerns that we've been looking into. And actually there's a firefighting training facility in Brunswick County that my colleague Kent Burdett on the Cape Fear River, he's the river keeper there, and he collected water samples downstream of that training facility, and it had astronomical levels of PFAS in the water sample. And so we're seeing already that these compounds aren't just contained in these training facilities, they're contaminating groundwater and coming into our streams.
I'm sorry, you can go ahead.
You mentioned, the PFAS in the drinking water. We have had to upgrade one of our water treatment plants, and it's costing us about $40 million to put in, and we have a few water treatment plants. This was the one that was most directly impacted by the airport. But you know, when you add up the cost, that $40 million for that one plant, so we can ensure our residents that they have safe, quality drinking water, that's priceless. We have to make that investment. I was not aware of the turnout gear, and Chief, I know that you mentioned it actually a few months ago, and I feel badly that maybe I wasn't clued in enough. It's important. You were talking about personal stories, and I think that makes the biggest difference, because I remember the first time I heard about presumptive disability and cancer was with Dave, with Butch Cummings' family. And that was really impactful, and sometimes that's what it takes. And so hearing about this and then understanding not only the investment that we probably need to make in different turnout gear, but also in the drinking water quality. So when you're looking at the price tag, it just is exponential.
Yeah, the chief mentioned you got about 5 sets this year. 100 sets? Around 130 sets of gear at about $4,000 a piece is what we will invest in this year. So it's it is quite an investment in money, and if I'm replacing 130 sets, that means I'm decommissioning 130 sets. That, what are we gonna do with it? You know, where's it gonna go? And you know, Stephanie mentioned the destroying. You got 15 buckets at 13 grand to dispose of. We've got 7,000 or 8,000 gallons. You know, what do we do with it? You know, I don't know what the state is going to do. I sit on a board with Peter Otoski, who is the fire marshal in the state of Massachusetts. He just retired, but you know, they banned it, and now they've got, you know, got some issues that they have to work through, and I appreciate the approach that the legislature has taken with it. Office of the State Fire Marshal hired 3 individuals, 1 in each quadrant of North Carolina, to do an inventory, statewide inventory of all firefighting foam, so they actually know what what the problem looks like. And we were glad to see that. We were glad to see they're taking that approach to inventory it. We need some help from the legislature on this issue. We really do. It's an all-out ban, like to cut it off, is not the answer, but there are other answers. Organizationally, we've taken an approach. If we have to put it down, then we have to clean it up. There are things that we have to put it down for. Fuel fires, there's about anywhere from 400 to 600 gasoline tankers that come in and out of Greensboro every single day. And people would be shocked to hear that. You guys have Selma. Selma, North Carolina is the exact same as Greensboro in the fuel tanker distribution. And not to mention the rail issue going on. When you do a commodity flow study, you find what is coming through your community. It's pretty eye-opening. But we would appreciate any help at the legislature to keep pushing that 20 million up, because I feel like it's getting taken away by a training center here. And UNC is assigned to do research. We think that's fantastic, but we do need some backing with funding.
Stephanie, you were gonna say something a minute ago. Do you wanna jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to speak to the Stanley County site. So one thing we didn't talk about earlier, there is actually a lawsuit that Attorney General Josh Stein has brought forward with foam manufacturers. And the Stanley County Airport is actually one of the locations listed in that suit because there is PFAS contamination there. So that's another reason why we really just don't want them to be using PFAS foam for training nearby. This would be a new site that's off a little bit from the airport, but there's already contamination there. There is an environmental justice community nearby, so we're really worried about environmental impacts as well as the exposure to firefighters at the facility for training, as well as any workers at the facility. The foams are just really hard to contain, and we know that they want to put in some controls, but history has shown that, well, first of all, they're forever chemicals, right? They have to go somewhere, and anywhere that these have been used for training and drills in the past, we've seen PFAS contamination. So we not many people are talking this session about trying to ban PFAS foams for emergencies in North Carolina, but we think banning for training purposes is a whole other issue, and we should really be able to get there. Other states are, even Kentucky has a training ban for PFAS foam, so we think we're not asking much there. We think we can get there, yeah. In Alaska, actually, Alaska, another red state, they just moved to ban PFAS foams for most emergencies. So other states are moving ahead with this, and from what I hear, it's really only a few years before the foams will become pretty obsolete because there's a lot of liability associated with them.
I saw a hand out of the corner of my eye somewhere.
I have my hand up.
Touch on something really
Oh, go
quickly,
ahead.
actually, just because I was hearing so much of this discussion around where does the money come from, right? $40 million to fix water. Well, in the case of AFFF, we know who the original manufacturers were. It's the 3M company. It was a co-patent between them and our own military back in the 70s. And so when we ask questions of where should the finances be to deal with solutions, or we look at the big question, you have 1.2 million firefighters in the United States. They each need 2 sets of gear, so that's like $8,000. So we're talking about $9 billion to just replace all the gear. That's my quick math, don't check it. There was just a $10.4 billion settlement this past week for AFFF contamination that the original attorney, who is the reason anyone in this room knows the word PFAS, was involved with. That's huge, it's fantastic, and I really need to emphasize, as someone who lives with an illness which has been associated to exposure to PFAS, has family members who have been impacted, probably from their same exposure to PFAS, with serious debilitating illnesses. We need to deal with this aggressively. We need to go after the people who are responsible. I really appreciate what Dave said, that yes, there are probably issues with our economic system that incentivize people to be bad, and some people are just bad, and they have a lot of money from being bad. Their money should be paying for these solutions, so I really do hope that the city of Greensboro is seeking litigation to pay for these costs.
We've signed on to it.
That's all. I would hope that if I were a firefighter, that's the first thing I would be doing, because this is not a guess as to whether you were exposed. You were exposed. You're still exposed. There's this really great legal process called medical monitoring, which is critical in the earlier stages of the litigation, which is the reason that we know about health effects that have been associated with PFAS, which is if you ever become sick with an illness which is then associated with these chemicals, you are now eligible to have the cost for your treatment paid for, which is how it should be. Like someone who's sick from something they didn't do wrong shouldn't have to pay a penny, right? And so as a person living with diseases, as a person who's been affected by this, I hope that you will deal with it actively, not passively. I mean, every firefighter I know is pretty active, so that's all I have to say.
Okay, well, we just have a little bit more time, so if there's any last thoughts or questions, burning comments from the panelists that you'd like. Not intended. Thanks.
I'll leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
So, not many people know this fact, and I know I'm gonna forget part of it, but North Carolina is the 3rd largest chemical producer in the United States. Texas #1, Louisiana #2, North Carolina #3. I think it's California, and I don't remember the 5th one. Those 5 states account for over half of the chemical transportations in all 50 states. We are #3. So when you look at chemical production around us and PFAS, we all know DuPont, Kenmore's, we've all heard, read, we've seen the stories, the horror stories, the contaminated wells, the drinking water. There's a balance there, and I think our state kind of struggles with the balance at times, because being #3, it pays a lot of bills, and we got to overcome that with some help.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask Stephanie, you said PFAS is a bipartisan issue, and would you say that that's the case across the board in North Carolina, or is there pushback from company? Are there pushbacks from company people who are associated with lobbyists and that sort of thing, like with Keymore's or?
You know, we're not seeing a lot of pushback from industry this year, but there are a series of bipartisan bills that have been introduced that are quite good. So thinking about Representative Davis, he has what's basically a polluter's pay bill. That bill would hold Chemours accountable, other polluters accountable for cleaning up drinking water if it was found to be above certain levels for PFAS. So that would be tremendously helpful for the utility in Wilmington, where their ratepayers are on the hook for increased bills because of Chemours pollution. So that's a Republican-led bill. There are Democratic-led bills that are addressing turnout gear as well as firefighting foam. The piece that we have seen move is what we've discussed, what we've seen in the budget. And again, I mean, I don't want to overstate the places where we want to see improvements. We're working really hard to get those improvements, but the buyback program would be wonderful. I mean, we support that, and that's a Republican-led piece. So yes, I think it is bipartisan. I'm not seeing a lot of industry pushback right now this year.
And just to kind of make a full picture for us, we talked a little bit about litigation, and Haw River Assembly is finalizing a settlement with the city of Burlington for PFAS discharges from the city of Burlington. And that has been a very long process. So 3 years later, we're finalizing a settlement. We've identified 3 sources of PFAS within the wastewater system. At the time when we first filed this notice of intent to sue the city of Burlington for their discharges, our levels coming directly into the Haw were over 40,000 parts per trillion. That number that I mentioned before was 0.004 parts per trillion. So directly downstream, the small town of Pittsboro pulls their drinking water directly from the Haw. Further downstream, you've got the drinking water source of Jordan Lake. Further there, you've got Fayetteville, Wilmington, and out to the ocean. So this was impacting so many people. And we have identified those 3 major sources and have eliminated 2 of them. They've changed their production lines, and the 3rd is working on a minimization strategy right now. So there's a lot that's happening on the firefighter foam side. There's a lot that's happening on the drinking water side. When we don't get good legislation, we use legal tools to uphold the Clean Water Act. So I don't want you to leave this room feeling disheartened and daunted that there's no positive movement coming forward. It just takes time and a lot of hard work. So if there's no last thoughts, I'd just like to give a final round of applause to our panelists. Thank you all so much. That concludes the film and panel. We'll send the film link to everybody that signed up through your email account.